Hi everyone, this is Eric Bond, the founder of Beat The GMAT, and welcome to today's webinar, which is called Mythbusters, MBA Admissions Edition. So I'm very excited because our very good friends at Stratus Prep and, of course, the founder and president of Stratus Prep, Shawn O'Connor, are co-hosting today's webinar on this very important topic. So I'm sure you hear a lot of conflicting information in your own lives during the MBA application process from your parents and your bosses and coworkers, friends, all sorts of informational channels about what you should do to gain admittance to the top business schools. But really, the sad truth is it's very difficult to sort through this information to understand what's myth and what's real. Fortunately, Shawn, who is a top expert in this MBA admissions field, is here to set the record straight and help us debunk some of these myths. So we're very delighted to have Shawn here, and as I mentioned, this is co-hosted by Stratus Prep. After this session, I highly recommend that you check out Stratus Prep services as well as Shawn's bio. Stratus Prep is an internationally recognized leader in law, business, and graduate school test prep and admissions consulting. And I think you're going to be very pleased by some of the resources that they have available to help you get into your dream schools. So with that, Shawn, I'm going to hand it off to you. Oh, actually, before I do that, though, just really quickly, a reminder about today's structure. I'm going to hand off the reins to Shawn in a moment. He's going to go through his presentations, and at the very end, we're going to leave some time for Q&A. So if you have a question that you'd like to pose to Shawn and you would like to get answered live, there's a chat box area right on your GoToWebinar panel on the right-hand side of your screen where you can enter a question at any time during the session, and we will have a live Q&A to ask Shawn his advice and pose your questions and get some live answers. So hopefully that makes sense. Shawn, I'm going to hand it over to you right now.
Great. Thanks so much, Eric, and welcome to this presentation of Mythbusters, MBA Admissions Edition. We're excited to be here and to share with you. I have come up with 15 of the most common myths that are out there percolating about MBA admissions, and we are going to set the record straight. Before I do that, I just wanted to start with a little bit of an introduction. So let's do that first, just so that you know who you're speaking with this evening. So my name is Shawn O'Connor, and in 2006, I founded Stratus Prep, which is one of the world's leaders in GMAT, GRE test prep, as well as MBA and graduate school admissions counseling. I myself did my law and business degrees at Harvard, and at Harvard I was in the top 5% of the class. I was what's called a Baker Scholar there. For undergrad, I went to Georgetown, and I have also worked with McKinsey, Lehman Brothers, and a number of other top firms. You can also catch me on Forbes, where I have a monthly article called The Launching Pad. And Vani Krishnamurthy is our MBA admissions director. She was at Harvard with me in the MBA program, and she had previously gone to Penn and worked with Bain and BCG. So we're going to bring the entire team's intelligence to bear on this problem tonight. You know, I sat down the entire crew of all of our MBA admissions counselors in order to come up with these myths and bust them for you. And you know, our team includes folks who have been on admissions committees and admissions interviewers, admissions readers, admissions liaisons at all of the top schools. So you know, we're really excited to bring this information to you. Before we do, just one important note, which is, you know, if you're out there thinking, I'm not sure if I'm going to apply or not, do I have enough time, you really want to consider that now is the ideal time to get started for some of those later round one applications like the MITs of the world, and you know, if you're doing the Duke November 1st deadline, and certainly for round two, this is, you know, a great time to get started. You know, we had a number of folks who applied to Harvard with us in round one, which, as you know, was due today at noon, and some of them had started in May, and it was just such a calm and really excellent process when they had all the time they needed. And so, you know, as you go through this presentation and we bust some myths for you, hopefully, you know, you'll begin to think about, you know, is this the year for me, and if it is, how I can best get started. All right, so just by sort of word of reference, you can catch us in U.S. News and Forbes, as well as Business Week, CNN, Financial Times. We were recently in the Wall Street Journal, as well as Fortune. And these are just some of the companies that our clients have come to us from. So you see everything from Google and Microsoft to Teach for America to JP Morgan and Goldman. So you see, you know, that we've worked with folks from the major consulting firms, audit houses, investment banks, technology firms, operating companies. And this is just a representative sample of where our clients have come from. All right. getting right into it, myth number 1. And this is one I hear so much in the last couple of years, which is HBS won't admit finance professionals. And the corollary of that is HBS won't admit male finance professionals. And let's debunk that myth straight away. I have written a Fortune article about this. You definitely can get into HBS as a finance professional, whether that's private equity, investment banking, venture capital. But what you can't do is assume that just because you've been successful in venture capital or private equity or investment banking that you are automatically entitled to a space in the HBS class. You're going to have to show a more well-rounded profile than you did in the past. It won't work just to talk about the size of the deals that you've done or how much money you've made for the firm or the returns that you've had for a fund. You're going to have to speak about how you've led people, both when you had authority and when you didn't have authority. You're going to have to speak to cross-cultural experiences. So you can get in, but you have to be very open to feedback, and you cannot take the advice. I see this mistake so many times when people come to me. They didn't use our services, and they want to know why they didn't get into HBS, but they're 780 and they're 38. And the fact of the matter is so many people rely on the advice of someone who got in 10 years ago or 20 years ago, and the entire admissions landscape at HBS has changed since then. The focus on global, the focus on innovation, the focus on entrepreneurship. You can demonstrate those characteristics from a finance background, and we help students do that in each and every round successfully. But you have to understand what HBS is looking for, and you have to sell what HBS is looking to buy. And what they're looking to buy today is different from what they were looking to buy 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. But do not be discouraged. You can absolutely get in as an American male in finance to HBS, okay? Don't let anybody tell you differently. Don't let anybody discourage you. Don't let, some of the pontificating you may have seen in the news. It's just about how you position yourself. And if you go in as a sort of typical finance applicant, it's true. It's very difficult to get in. But if you think a little bit more creatively about your application profile, you absolutely can be admitted to HBS regardless of what industry you are coming from, including finance. So we have just busted our first myth tonight. Let's check out myth number 2. You cannot apply to business school while you are in college. Now, there is some underlying truth to this myth, and most of these myths, there's something that got the myth started, the urban legend, so to speak. But here in myth number 2, the thinking is I can't go straight through from undergrad, or I can't apply at all in undergrad. And there are a number of programs that you can use now to apply straight through from undergrad. And some people say, yeah, but they're not top programs. Actually, that's not true either. So the Harvard 2+2 program, as you may know, you get admitted during your senior year. And actually, the first time that you can the first time that you can apply is in the summer between your junior and senior year. And so, hopefully, we will, if we sort of see you interested in HBS as a college student, we're going to tell you apply in that first round between the end of junior year and the beginning of senior year. That is the best early round to apply in. But you can apply throughout the 3 rounds of your senior year, and then you get in. And the reason it's called 2+2 is you're admitted. You wait 2 years, and then you come back and you start business school 2 years out after getting some professional experience. Stanford has a direct admission or deferred admission plan, so you can either come straight from undergrad and go straight into Stanford Business School, or if you feel you'd benefit from 1 to 3 years of business experience, you can go ahead and take that deferral and then do that. So those are your 2 options for Harvard and Stanford, and a number of other schools have some more options. So don't let anybody tell you that you can't get into business school while you're still in college. Myth number 3. Now this is another one that has really been percolating this year. You cannot get into business school if you are over the age of 30. You can get into business school if you're over the age of 30. What business schools care about is not the chronological years, but where you are in your career. And if you are at a point in your career where you're either making a career transition, you're trying to break through a certain glass ceiling, you're trying to move into a new industry, you're trying to learn to lead larger groups of people, That happens for some people at 25, and it happens for other people at 32, 33, 34. And so we have been successful in helping folks in their early to mid-30s gain entrance to top business schools. So do not let anybody discourage you that it is just impossible to get in. The problem is most people who are over the age of 30 think that they need to show, they need to show all of this achievement and not focus on what they still need to learn. If you want to get admitted and you're over 30, you need to show I still have something to learn, okay? Because if you don't and you just try to pretend, look at all my successes, then they're going to say, okay, this person doesn't really need an MBA, and they won't get admitted. But the fact of the matter is you can get in over the age of 30. This segment of the population, though, as well as finance professionals, especially males in finance, really, really benefit from the coaching of real experts. And at Stratus Prep, you actually work with two of us so that we can present two different perspectives on your application at every single step along the way. And I think for applicants who are in these age groups or in these industry groups for certain schools that may not be the particular favorite, it's a little bit more competitive. But you absolutely can do it, and don't let anybody tell you that you can't. All right, are we ready for myth number 4? Here it comes. You need a GMAT score of 700 plus to get into top schools. Totally false, totally false. Okay, so I have had students who've worked with me with as low as a 590 who have been admitted to Harvard Business School. We've seen people in the sort of mid to high 600s who have gotten into Wharton, for example. Okay, so you absolutely, now obviously the GMAT's important. That's why Beat the GMAT is such a wonderful and useful resource. But if you've worked your butt off and you just can't quite get to that level and you're at 680 or 670 or 650, you absolutely can get into a top business school. But again, you are a real candidate for proper marketing because you're going to need to overcome this hurdle. You're going to need to isolate it. You're going to need to isolate that GMAT score, show that it is not reflective of your potential. And then once you've isolated that, show all of the other strengths that you will bring so that you can overcome this little hiccup, but you can get in. We had a woman, for example, with a 640 last year who got into Kellogg, and these are individuals, men and women from all different backgrounds that I'm talking about. So, 590 into Harvard last year, 640 into Kellogg. You can do it. You can get into these schools even if you have an imperfect GMAT score. It's great to have a wonderful GMAT score. Everybody should do their best, but if you're just not hitting the level that you need to be at, that's okay. Then let's go ahead and reposition and focus on how we're going to market you to the schools so that you can be as successful as possible. Okay. Next, myth number 5, having certain company names. We've all heard them, right? McKinsey, Goldman, Facebook, Google. Having certain company names on your resume almost guarantees you an acceptance. Au contraire, especially in the new sort of environment focused more on entrepreneurship. There is not sort of, it's no longer proper to think of this as if we have a certain name or if, we have a certain background that we're automatically going to get in. Okay? So, yes, last year we had folks from Goldman who did get into, Harvard and Stanford, but we also had folks from Goldman who, did not necessarily want to go to those schools. They wanted to go to a Chicago, or because they wanted to focus on certain financial stuff, or they wanted to go to a Kellogg to do brand marketing. And so not everybody from Goldman wants to go to these schools. And not everybody from Goldman, I had someone come into my office last week who had applied last year from a top bank, not Goldman, but another top bank, and didn't get in anywhere with the 760. And didn't get into any of the top 5 schools because the packaging was off. So, you definitely want to leverage whatever work experience you have to show that the lessons you've learned. And for some people, that'll be big, well-known, established companies like a Goldman, like a McKinsey, like a Bain, like a BCG, like a JP Morgan. For other people, it'll be more technology-based entrepreneurship firms like, like a Google or a Facebook or a Twitter. For other folks, it'll be, operating companies. For other folks, it'll be the military. But at the end of the day, it's about the experience you've had. And that experience and what you've learned and how you'll bring that to the school, that is what is really valuable. And don't be lulled into a false sense of security because somebody said, oh, you'll be fine. You have great numbers and you worked here or you worked there. You cannot leave anything to chance in today's very, very, very competitive admissions market. And, there's been a slight drop in applications last year to certain schools like Columbia and NYU, but not to the top schools like Harvard and Stanford and Wharton. So, at those top schools especially, do not be lulled into any false sense of security. All right, let's take a look at myth number 6. GPA is insignificant if you've been out of school several years. Okay? No, that is not true. GPA is a significant factor at all of the top 10 business schools. Now, it's of a varying degree. At Harvard and Stanford, GPA is more important than GMAT. Okay? It is more important than GMAT. So if you have a low GPA, it makes it that much harder at Harvard and Stanford. But then at other schools, okay, for example, Wharton, GPA is not nearly as significant as GMAT. Same thing at Columbia. You can overcome hurdles. So we had an individual under 3.0 admitted to Wharton last year. We had someone else admitted with a very significant merit scholarship in the 3 to 3.2 range. So, you know, you can be admitted with a lower GPA, but GPA is still important. It is still a factor. Don't let somebody say, but look at all this work experience you have. You'll be fine. Your GPA doesn't matter. It does matter. Okay, you have to recognize it is a hurdle to be overcome. And again, it's the same thing as having a lower GMAT. If you have a lower GMAT, we need to isolate that and focus on making the rest of the package as strong as possible. If you have a lower GPA, we need to explain that. We need to say what caused that. We need to demonstrate what you've done to overcome that. And then you can be well positioned. But just know Harvard and Stanford is where it's the most important, less important at the next couple of schools like Wharton and Chicago. All right, so that is the real inside scoop on how GPA plays in. Sometimes people also ask a corollary of this, which is how important is it what school I went to for undergrad? It is important. Okay, whether you're calling in tonight from the U.S. or you're calling in during the day from Asia right now, where you went to school is important. And the admissions officers, they know the schools not only in the U.S. but in Canada and in India and in China. They know in the major economies that are turning out a lot of MBA applicants, and we work with many people from around the world, many folks in Shanghai and Hong Kong and Mumbai and Delhi. They know, you know, the difference between the IITs and other universities within India, the difference between the University of Peking and some other universities within China. So, you know, they do understand these gradations. They certainly know the difference between American universities. It is not dispositive. Okay, if you have a really strong GPA, it's less likely that they'll care where it's from. If you have a really weak GPA, you may not be able to make up for it. I mean, really weak, like under 2.5. You may not be able to make up from it even if you went to Harvard undergrad. But, you know, that is a factor. But the overall factor is how well you did. Because if you did extremely well, the argument that you can make is, I would have done extremely well no matter where I went. And I had reasons for choosing this school that might have gone beyond simply prestige. All right, myth number 7. You have a lower chance of admission if you reapply the next year. I get so many calls about this, and people are like, God, Shawn, I don't know. Should I go this year? Should I go next year? I just can't decide. And they really want to go this year. They really want to be admitted and start school in August or September of 2013. But they're nervous. What if I don't get in? That's okay. Okay, we have exceptionally high success rates at Harvard, at Stanford, at Wharton. But we have even higher success rates if you are a reapplicant applying for readmission after having been turned down the first time. And the reason for that is if you were competitive at a Harvard or you were competitive at a Wharton and you come back the next year, they know you could have gone to another top 10 school. But you chose to come back, and that determination, that brushing yourself off and picking yourself up, that says so much about who you are as a professional and who you are as a person. And so that it is totally false. It's not like they make a judgment on you and then they're never going to want you. This is not about being your friend. This is about filling a class. And sometimes they would love to have you, but they have too many people who have very similar backgrounds to you, who they've already accepted, or there's somebody very, very similar to you who also wrote a best-selling book, or, has been an astronaut or something like that. And so, you're going to lose out this year. That doesn't mean that you won't lose out next year. Next year you'll come and you'll be even stronger. Now, the key caveat to that is, there's a key caveat here. You cannot do a poor job on your own application this year and then try to get professional help next year. You need to get professional help the first time you apply. And the reason for that is schools keep applications on file for at least a year or two. So if you just handed in a very, shoddy first application this year, they're going to go back and look at that, and they're going to say, well, this is, what the person really thinks of us. And I don't care how polished the second one is, it's not authentic. So, what we always recommend is get the help the first time around. It's much easier the second time around once you've been through the process, but you need to be cognizant that everything you give them, everything you send them, is going to be evaluated when you do ultimately reapply if it comes to that. Though, fortunately for many folks, they are pleasantly surprised, and they never need to do that second application. All right, are we ready? Here comes myth number 8. You should not talk about entrepreneurship in your application if your venture ultimately failed. Some people are so afraid, but Shawn, my business failed. I had started this hot dog stand and it failed, and I'm really nervous. That's a great story to be told, okay? Because, and I've had numerous people admitted to the very top schools who have taken this advice to heart and who have spoken honestly about entrepreneurial failure. Because you know what? You can't have a robust class discussion. If you're trying to pick the class for an MBA program, you can't have a robust discussion around entrepreneurship if every single person in the room who ever was an entrepreneur was extraordinarily successful. Because there are a lot of mistakes that are made in entrepreneurship, and those mistakes need to be shared with the class, and that's really, really valuable. Okay? And so if you're reflective, if you're aware of the mistakes you made, so many successful entrepreneurs had so many failures before they ever were successful, but they learned from those mistakes. They reflected on those mistakes. And that's what you need to demonstrate. So don't shirk away. Don't hide behind a failed entrepreneurial venture. Put it out there and be proud. Say, this is what happened, this is what I learned, this is what I could have done better, and you will find yourself in a very privileged position when you get your results back, I believe. All right, so that was myth number 8. We're not going to be afraid about talking about a failed entrepreneurial venture. Next, this is the oldest one in the book. Knowing alumni at a school, especially wealthy alumni, can get you in. I'm not going to say there are never cases where this is helpful, but this is something, again, that people really, really overestimate, especially with the very top schools. And the reason for that is, okay, if you sort of turn on all of your wealthy alumni and have 10 of them send letters, there's 2 potential problems with that. One, if you're not really qualified to get in, and then the school admits you, these schools are under a microscope, and they are worried that the press might catch wind that they're basically selling seats in their class because they're admitting the friends and family of high donors. And so, we have seen people who came to us who had, they hadn't worked with us at the time, and they had submitted an application, and they had, the library was named after their last name, and they were not admitted. Okay, and so then we had to work with them to actually make sure that they demonstrated the merits to get in on their own. Okay, so don't think that having a wealthy alumni who has given $1 million to the school write a little note to the Dean of Admissions guarantees you admission. It does not. It is really important that you stand on your own 2 feet and on the merits of your own application. The second thing that's really, really important is that if you overflood them with 10 letters from wealthy alumni, that can actually backfire. Maybe you would have gotten in, but it conveys this idea that you don't have any self-confidence. You don't think you could get in on your own, and that's why you're feeling like you have to flood them with all of these letters from your patrons, and it looks like you're not your own person. So be real careful with this. A note or 2 or 3 at most can be fine, but you definitely do not want to be pushing too many of these because it can be really, really problematic. And always remember that you will be judged first and foremost on the quality of your application. All right, myth number 10. If 2 schools have the same essay question, you can use the same essay. I know it's tempting, right? Just change the names. Just do a little Control F. Hope you find them all, and then send that that Stanford essay to Wharton, and it'll be okay. This is really, really not advisable. So when we're working with folks, we insist that you do a separate essay for each school, even if the essay question is the same. Now, there might be a paragraph that's similar, but the schools are looking for different things. Wharton is looking for something very, 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 very different from Stanford. And so if you answer both of their short and long-term goal and why Wharton or why Stanford questions, if you answer those 2 questions the same, question 1 at Wharton, question 2 at Stanford, if you give them the same answer and you just change out the name Stanford for Wharton, it's not going to work. Because either you're going to be too focused on what Wharton wanted, and then Stanford will not, it will not resonate with them at all, or you'll be too focused on what Stanford was looking for, or you'll try to split the baby and give each of them a little something, and neither of them will be satisfied. So it is a very risky strategy. That is probably one of the hugest impacts of working with a seasoned admissions counseling team that really has true inside expertise about the schools, is that we can really share with you when they're building a class at Wharton versus when they're building a class at Harvard versus when they're building a class at Stanford. What are they really looking for? Okay. Let's go to myth number 11 here. Admissions committees always read your whole application before making a decision. Let me tell you a story. If your application begins, when I was tutoring George, my mentee, the chances of them getting to the second sentence in your application are probably less than 10%. Because everybody writes about their time mentoring somebody named George. Okay, maybe it's not George, but everybody writes about my mentee, and I was tutoring him, and I inspired him, and I helped him, and I helped him get into college, and it was so meaningful. So, if you write that, that is not going to be compelling because so many other people write that exact same story. And so, you really can't assume, even if you just use that as the intro, that the rest of the essay will be fine, because it won't be, because they'll never get to it. Okay, so you have to think, when I'm starting each essay, what am I going to do to get them to read the next line? And then what am I going to say in the next line that gets them to read the line after that? Because if they're reading your application at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, you want to make sure they keep reading. And that is what the whole point of myth number 11 is. Remember that at any point, for any reason, an admissions committee member could just decide you're a no-go. And so we have to be rigorous that at no point along the way do we give them a reason to put down. We continue to excite and delight them with new and intriguing and interesting information about you and what you would bring to the community and your passions and your interests so that they keep reading, they get that full picture of you, and then you compare really, really well to the rest of the applicant pool. All right, so that was myth number 11. Let's look at myth number 12. A recommendation from a CEO or a famous person is ideal. Absolutely not. If you had the choice between getting Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan, to write your recommendation, or the VP that sits next to you and oversees your work, you want that VP. Because what schools are looking for in a recommendation is not the name on the letterhead, or in this case, since it's done electronically, the name on the email. What they care about is the relationship the person has had to you. Was the person your direct supervisor? Do they include specific anecdotes about your strengths and weaknesses and your successes and your setbacks so that the recommender does not need to take their evaluation at face value, but can actually see for herself or himself the qualities that you would bring to their business school. So don't go for the recommender from the higher title or the famous person who you tangentially know. Get people who know you really well, who can reflect on you really honestly, and then have those folks submit a recommendation in support of your application. All right, so we've got 3 more, and then we move to Q&A. So number 13, having an undergraduate business major gives you an advantage in the MBA admissions game. This is not true. In fact, if you're not careful, having an undergraduate business degree can actually be a disadvantage. Because remember, they are not looking for the machine of business going in. They are looking for someone who has a lot to learn about business. So if you have an undergraduate business degree, an undergraduate business major, you need to convey to them why you also need an MBA. Right? And so saying, I'm going to take finance classes and learn how to model, when they see that you took 6 finance classes and got A's in all of them, well, then they know you know how to model. They don't need to hear about how you need to learn how to model. Okay? So having an undergraduate business major gives you an advantage. Totally false. If anything, it's a potential disadvantage. It needs to be neutralized. We've had plenty of people get into the top 3 schools with undergraduate business majors, but they were cognizant of the potential pitfalls of having an undergraduate business major, and we worked together to shape an application that would really work. Okay, so let's go ahead to myth number 14. Schools will understand your lack of post-college community involvement because your job is very time-consuming. We all work a lot of hours. I think this week I probably will work 100 hours, and I know many of you out there as well. It's busy time at work. After Labor Day, lots of deals to happen, lots of consulting engagements, and you're working a lot of hours. And you're like, how am I supposed to find time to be on the youth board of my local favorite nonprofit? Well, you need to find the time, because just because you're in investment banking and you work 100 hours a week, or just because you're a consultant and you travel 40 weeks out of the year, that does not excuse you from community involvement. Okay, you chose to take that job, but they are looking for the complete person. And so what you need to do is you need to find a extracurricular involvement where you can be involved at a strategic level. I don't want you just fundraising or just volunteering, at the hospital handing out, candy canes. I want you actually doing something strategic, okay? When you are doing something strategic, you're going to have to find something that fits your lifestyle. So if you have to work really, really late during the week, maybe it's an organization that has its board meetings on the weekends. If you have to travel a lot, maybe it's something where you can dial in and still be involved. Okay, but it's really, really important to understand that schools are not going to excuse a lack of community involvement just because you had a time-consuming job, because basically everybody applying has had a really, really time-consuming job. And so, there are going to be people who found a way, who made the time, and you have to do it yourself as well. Okay, this is particularly true, I notice, with our international applicants. So please make sure that if you're out there, in the far reaches, that you also make sure that you understand that in the American and to a certain extent the Canadian and British programs, but especially in the American programs, they're going to want to see this. And it's really tough if you come to us and you say, it's a month before the application and I have no community involvement. If you come to us a few months before, we may be able to make some helpful suggestions. But if you come the month before, you're totally out of luck. So make sure that that you're thoughtful about this, because it is a concern for everyone. It's a concern for a lot of people in New York. It's a concern for a lot of people in the booming Asian economies, San Francisco as well. So especially those centers that are known for really, really long hours, it's just not an excuse, unfortunately. You're going to have to find the time. All right, so now we get to our final myth for the evening, and then I'll have a little bit of a wrap-up, and then we'll go to your questions with Eric. So myth 15, you should not provide any explanation for shortcomings because it only calls more attention to these deficiencies. If you have a 650 on the GMAT, they're going to notice that. It's on the application. They're going to get a GMAT report from you. If you have a 3.0, they're going to notice, okay? If you took a year off, they're going to notice, okay? So we need to make sure that we speak to these issues and that we provide explanations, not excuses, okay? Explanations, not excuses. The problem with excuses is it makes it look like you don't take responsibility. You need to own your academic record. You need to own your GMAT score. You need to own your professional choices. But it is absolutely fair to explain what might have contributed to your academic performance or your GMAT performance or your choices in terms of work. And so do not think that they're just going to gloss over them and not notice them, because they're not going to call you for an explanation. I can guarantee you that. They're not going to call you for an interview to get an explanation. If you can't convince them on the application, you will fail to get over that first hurdle, and you will never see the inside of that interview room that we all covet. So make sure that you explain any shortcomings and don't just hope for the best. All right. So now we come to the final page of our presentation before we go to questions, and a couple of things. First, if you have signed up for this webinar and you have shared your information with us, you are signed up for an extra $100 off in addition to the regular 10% Beat the GMAT discount. If you didn't sign up but you want to, you want to go ahead and make sure that you secure that discount, just go ahead and email us right now at consult@stratusprep.com. You see that email address at the bottom, consult@stratusprep.com. If you email and say, I'm on your webinar now, make sure that I get my extra $100 off, we will put you into the database. So, we always give 10% off all of our GMAT preparation, which is available worldwide, as well as our MBA admissions counseling, which is also available worldwide. We have a lot of candidates from Europe, from Asia, a good number from the Middle East and Africa, as well as South America and North America. So we always offer all of our friends at Beat the GMAT a 10% discount, but for being with us tonight, you get an extra $100 off any of our packages. Just go ahead and email us about that. In addition, we do free consultations. Now, let me just say a word about our free consultations. During these free consultations, it's 30 minutes with me. I'm not going to be able to solve all of your admissions problems. What I can do is tell you how, in working with us, we could put together a plan to make sure that you are successful in working with us to achieve your goals, whether they be on the GMAT or in MBA admissions counseling. So, if you'd like a free consultation, you can call us at 212-307-1788, 212-307-1788, or you can email consult@stratusprep.com, and one of my colleagues will be happy to contact you to set up a free consultation to talk about how we could work together to really help ensure that you get into the school of your choice, even if you have that lower GPA that we talked about tonight, or that lower GMAT score that we talked about tonight, or you have a hiccup in your work experience. These things can be overcome. Okay, there is hope for you. So let's talk about how we can get it done. So with that, I'll turn it back to Eric, and I look forward to fielding all of your interesting questions about Mythbusters MBA Admissions Edition.
Wow, Shawn, that was totally awesome. I think you covered a lot of discussion points that I've seen over the years on Beat The GMAT. So really, really great. I think I speak for the audience when I say, yeah, you completely nailed this one. For those of you who might have joined us late, we've been, yeah, of course. We're speaking with Shawn O'Connor, who is the founder and president of Stratus Prep. And we just heard the 15 top myths that Shawn has seen among his MBA applicants and his analysis of those points too. And at this point, Shawn is going to stick around for the remaining time this session to answer your questions. So if you have clarifications that you want to ask Shawn about anything that you heard and seen during this presentation, now's the time to enter your question. You can do so by posting your question in the chat box area on the right-hand side of your screen on this GoToWebinar platform. So, Shawn, why don't we take this first question from Michael? And Michael is referring to the first myth, which is, I believe, related to finance. So, Michael is asking not to be nitpicky about banking, but it seems that when referring to banking, everyone is talking about investment banking. What about commercial banking? Is that lumped into the same pool as the general finance banking category?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. And so, commercial banking is within the financial services industry. Now, there will be a separate breakout for commercial banking, investment banking, private equity, venture capital. Sometimes they'll even go as deep as like mezzanine debt investing. So there will be, retail banking, commercial banking. There will be all these sub-breakouts under financial services. But at HBS, they do generally look at that as a finance category. However, I have some good news for you, Michael, which is there will be many fewer individuals applying from commercial banking or corporate banking. And so if you are able to convey your unique story, and we've worked with a number of commercial bankers, even retail bankers, as well as corporate bankers, to convey the unique perspective that your work has instilled in you and will allow you to bring to the HBS classroom. That, as well as a really well-balanced HBS application that includes and touches on all the other things that HBS is looking for, can really, really help set you apart. It is tough to get in to HBS as a finance professional, and that would include commercial, corporate banking, retail banking, but it's certainly not impossible. We've seen folks be successful with that profile, but they need to be really, really strategic in their approach. Great question.
Okay, next I think is getting back to the GMAT myth, which I think is a big myth that people talk about a lot in the Beat the GMAT community. I'm sorry if I mispronounced this name. I think it's Kedar is asking a nuance to what you just mentioned about the 700 plus. Is it or is it not a myth that the Indian IT male needs a 700 plus to get into a top 20 business school? What can we compensate? What can we do to compensate a score of just 680 for an Indian IT professional trying to get into schools like Tepper, UCLA, McCombs, and Keene and Flagler? So, Shawn, does that myth hold for Indian IT males, or are there different rules?
Yeah, so that myth holds for Indian IT professionals, and everybody, everywhere in the world thinks about things differently. So I don't want us to lump all Indian IT professionals together into sort of one homogeneous pool. But what we do see is that these myths, they tend to have greater staying power in parts of the world where a lot of admissions in programs in that country are based on a test score alone. So, in America, everybody understands that the GMAT is a huge issue, but people may know other folks who've gotten in with lower GMAT scores, and so that myth is beginning to get more busted here within the U.S. I can tell you probably, we must be one of the largest service providers to Indian IT professionals just based on the number of people that I know that we've worked with, and I can tell you that we've had Indian IT professionals across the spectrum from, the low 600s to the high 700s, and, certainly, as a rule, having a higher GMAT is advantageous, but we have seen situations where people in the mid-600s have gotten into, a number of the schools that Kedar mentioned. So, whether it's UCLA or Tepper or even schools significantly higher than that. So this myth holds worldwide. Okay, it's just that some people find it a little bit harder to get beyond this myth, depending on where they're coming from. But we're happy to speak to cases where we've been very successful with Indian IT professionals who did not have, this super high GMAT that everybody thinks they have to have. It just, is not the case. And so, you want to look at your broader profile, and there are some really unique essays that I've seen IT professionals write about that have really propelled them. I mean, I'm thinking of one right now who got into MIT with a score in the mid-600s, and so, it is absolutely a myth there as well. So, that's a myth that I hear, probably more than the general myth, but it is a myth still. So, I don't want you to get discouraged by that.
So this next question, Shawn, comes from Laura, and I think there's a number of folks who are scared about the community service myth because there's a number of questions coming in about that. So what are some thoughts and what are your thoughts on some possible ways that you can overcome not having any community service in your background?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. So hopefully you had some community service or extracurricular leadership when you were in college. So one way to address this is to focus on that in your essay materials so that you convey a compelling story of extracurricular and community leadership, even if it was during college. That would be one piece of advice. But something that we work with our clients on all the time is we work with how to help them get that community service experience. And what we're seeing is an incredible phenomenon, which is people who are signing up for our services, and I think we may be the only firm that does this, but who are signing up a year or 2 years in advance with us. And we don't charge you anything more. You can sign up whenever, and we will give you unlimited help until you complete your applications, even if it's 2 years down the road. And so people are doing that so that we can help them craft their profile over that time, since it doesn't cost them anything more. But if you are applying this year, then you should definitely apply in round 2. And you definitely have to find some strategic initiative at a community organization or a nonprofit organization or a charitable organization that you can assume immediately, so that you have something to speak about when it comes to that section on community service. You cannot just leave it blank. I mean, that is a section of the application, and you must have something. And people say, yeah, but it'll be so short-sighted. Well, something I have learned in this industry is better than nothing when it comes to this community service involvement. Maybe, and that's something that we can discuss addressing in the, pertinent to myth number 15, we can address that in the extra information session as to why this involvement is relatively new. You should always be honest and straightforward about, the dates of your involvement, but it is not too late. So if you're thinking about applying, it's a great time, to sit down with an admissions counselor and really hash out, what am I going to do? How are we going to put this together so that I can try to overcome that hurdle? Because it is a scary hurdle, but it is a real and important hurdle nonetheless. And I see so many people who just think, but, everybody would understand I can't do it. But if somebody else did it, then you're a less competitive applicant than them. And we cannot cede that ground.
Shawn, I see a follow-up question to Laura's question, which you just answered from Ashok. Ashok is asking, but how important is community service when applying to business schools in Europe and Asia? Is there a difference between a Europe and Asian business school admissions and their view of community service versus, let's say, United States-based schools?
That's a great question as well, and there definitely is a difference between the international schools and the American schools. In the American schools, it's a must-have. In the European and Asian schools, it's a very, very nice to have. So what do I mean by that? In the American schools, if you're missing it, it's sort of like you're lacking a key characteristic. In the Asian and European schools, by having this additional characteristic, it makes you that much more competitive, and it sets you apart in a pool that generally is less likely to have community service as a robust part of their application. If I had to rank it, it's probably the number 3 or 4 component in terms of importance in the U.S., probably 5 or 6 in Europe, and 5 or 6 in Asia as well. But, if it's something that can be done without a lot of serious difficulty, I definitely would consider doing it because, everybody appreciates leaders who demonstrate leadership not only at work but in their life as well.
I imagine, Shawn, that as in the last few years, too, the emphasis on community services has become even more important, given some of the questions about ethics from MBA graduates getting some of the blame in the Great Recession or acting badly. So have you noticed that trend, too, that the emphasis around community services is growing as well in the past few years?
Yeah, and another way that you're also seeing, I think that's absolutely true, Eric, and another thing that you're seeing is that in the recommendations, there's more inclusion of integrity and ethics both in the ranking grids and in what they're asking recommenders. We're seeing that start to encroach in on the questions they ask recommenders, because I think they're really feeling that, they cannot teach integrity. They can teach business ethics, but you have to have a certain basic level of integrity first. And so they want to sort of see that, and then from there, they feel like they can, instill the ethical guidelines and leadership into you.
So moving on to another question, back to the GMAT. Christine wanted a clarification. She says, you mentioned isolating a low GMAT score, but what are ways to draw attention to sufficient quantitative skills outside of additional classes? Or is it really additional classes the most effective way of doing that?
Yeah, I mean, we've had students do it in a number of different ways. So there are primarily, 3 ways that you can do it, but the first 2 are strongly preferred. Number 1 is to point to strong undergraduate coursework that you've already had in finance or economics or accounting or math, because then that's in-classroom experience during your undergrad, and that is, sort of what the GMAT is supposed to measure for anyway. And so if you can demonstrate strong performance in, a number of classes in undergrad, that will really help a low, under the 80th percentile, which is what we consider a lower GMAT quant score for the top schools. The second way is to proactively, as Christine says, take classes as you're applying to business school through, some reputable institution. One that a lot of people use is UCLA Extension, to take finance or economics or accounting or math courses through a really reputable, either, face-to-face university like an NYU, for example, or through like a UCLA Extension or UC Berkeley. So, taking those classes can really be a tremendous value if you didn't have them in undergrad to help, again, demonstrate overcoming, quantitative weakness. Now, the third way to do it, but it is not nearly as strong as the first 2, because at the end of the day, business school is going to be an academic classroom. The third best way is to try to show some quantitative skill set from your work and have your managers comment on that and things like that in the recommendation. But again, you are less likely to get mileage out of that because that's somebody's opinion. They can state what you did, but nobody really knows exactly how well you did it. There's no sort of formal evaluative methodology. And so, it is really better to go one of the first 2 routes. Another thing you can do, but I don't advise it just because of the amount of time it takes, is people will do things like pursue the CFA certification. Not as, not as easy as just taking a class at, at a university. So don't necessarily recommend going down that route, but that is another option for you.
I think, Shawn, you've mentioned some really great insights about taking a course as a strong route to demonstrating strong quant skills or sufficient quant skills, but there's been a bit of a controversy I've noticed in the Beat the GMAT community in the last 2 years about online courses. Do you have any opinions about if I took supplemental courses at an online university, let's say it's like a University of Phoenix, is that a sufficient way to showcase my quant skills?
Right. So I really don't think that you should take them at an online-only university, because I don't think that there is the brand equity there that a Harvard or a Michigan or a Duke or a Wharton are really going to pay attention to. So what we coach our folks to do is to do those classes, those quant classes at UCLA Extension. If you need to do it online, if you can do it live, that's always preferred. But if you need to do it online, then do it online at a top-tier university that happens to offer courses online rather than a strictly online university. It will cost you a little bit more, but we think that the return on investment is much, much, much higher, because nobody wants to spend the money and sit through 4 months of an online course only to not really have that move the dial for the MBA admissions committee.
Syed has a question for you that's slightly peripheral to today's presentation, but I like this question, which is Syed's asking, can Shawn shed some light on how you help executive MBA applicants, and perhaps also shed some light on how some of these myths apply or do not apply for executive MBA applicants?
Yeah, absolutely. So we work with a significant number of executive MBA applicants each and every year, and it is a different process. And you really, if you're thinking about retaining professional help, you need to make sure that the folks that you're working with really, really understand that space, because it is very different from the, from the regular MBA admission space. With execs, number one, sometimes you can get a waiver for the GMAT altogether. So, for example, Booth gives those waivers, and that can be tremendously relieving for applicants. Second, you're going to need to demonstrate very differently from an MBA who needs to show what they need to learn and what the next sort of step they need to take is. What you need to do as an exec ed is you need to demonstrate enough people and enough budget and enough resources are under your control that you really are already a leader of the firm. If you have company sponsorship, that makes a huge difference for an executive MBA, much less so for a regular MBA. So there are, many of the same myths apply, but you have to tweak your application because the GMAT is less important for execs. GPA is a little less important for execs. Work experience is way more important. It needs to be way more senior, at least 8 to 10 years usually. The way you want to speak to your work experience and your goals has to be very, very different from a regular MBA applicant. So there are some similarities, but there are some significant differences. But especially for our exec clients, we say, let's not get hung up on the GMAT. Let's get to work on the applications. That really is priority number one.
Okay. Let's see. I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions or so. This next one, Shawn, comes from Sandeep. Sandeep is asking, do schools prefer permanent work experience versus contract work experience? Are those views, is there a sort of a value judgment on those 2 types of work?
Yeah, I mean, there's not a value judgment in terms of whether it's contract or full-time employment. What they look at, obviously if it's contract, it should be for some long period of time, months or years, not weeks. But, if you're doing contract work, then you want to still show how you were integrated into the culture and what you learned from that and maybe the process of integrating yourself into the organization. That's all very, very important and interesting. So you can definitely apply successfully with contract work. You don't have to hold a more standard typical job, but when you do the contract work, you want it to be longer engagements, and you do want to speak to sort of that process that you went to of integrating yourself into the culture and leading even though you didn't have any authority within the organization because you were not a formal member of it. And often contractors have a greater diversity or breadth of experiences. That can be something that's really helpful to speak to as well.
That's great. So for this, let's see. For this next question, I think we can do 2 more actually. Next one's from Kevin. It's related to optional essays, and this is more of a technical question. So if optional essays don't have a specific word limit, is there a specific number of words I should aim for?
Yeah, so you don't want to overdo it with the optional essays because, remember, you want them to actually get read. And there's no little, angel or devil sitting on the shoulder of the admissions reader making sure they read every last word of your application. So, typically, unless you have something, life-altering to say, I usually like an optional essay to be 200 to 300 words. That's enough to meaningfully discuss and explain any issues that might have come up, anything else that you want to share with the admissions committee. 500 words or more, definitely too much. It cannot go onto a second page. Really, 200 to 300 words, that's the way to go.
Okay. And I think, Shawn, for this last question, this is actually related to some Stratus Prep services. So Angie is interested in understanding whether Stratus Prep offers any specific kinds of packages for consortium applicants. And also, have you worked with consortium applicants in the past? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we have a special structure for consortium applicants. We've had a number of successful consortium applicants last year and for each of our years since we started, about 5 or 6 years ago. So we're very familiar with working with consortium applicants. For those of you who don't know, the consortium is a way to apply to a series of business schools through a common application, but a series of additional extra questions. There can be strategic reasons to use or not to use the consortium application, and that's something when we work with clients, we speak to them about that. It was traditionally, until this year, for members of underrepresented minority groups, but now anybody can use it, but there may be strategic reasons to or to not use it at certain schools and with certain profiles, and so that is definitely something that we would coach you on. If you're working with us, we do have, because each consortium school is not another complete application, but rather sort of like another half application, because the common parts stay the same, but the school-specific additional essays, which you also have to do, vary from school to school. We do have a different pricing structure, Angie, so if you want to just reach out to us at consult@stratusprep.com, we can go ahead and walk you through how that works so that you can understand, it is a little bit more cost advantageous if you're doing the consortium, but we'll also explain to you the advantages and disadvantages of applying through the consortium so that you can make the very best choice for you.
And with that, Shawn, I think we're going to have to close up the session for today. So for our audience members, I just wanted to recap that we've been speaking with Shawn O'Connor, who is the founder and president of Stratus Prep. He just walked us through an amazing presentation called Mythbusters, MBA Admissions Edition, where many of the most common myths that I've seen, and I'm sure you've seen, in the MBA admissions process was just debunked by Shawn. And of course, Shawn has just stuck around as well to answer many of your questions live here during this session. So Shawn, thank you so much for spending your evening with us to share your insights.
Thank you. It was my pleasure, Eric.
Great. And before we close tonight, I just want to reiterate what you see on the screen. The very, very generous folks at Stratus Prep have offered to take off an extra $100 on your purchases on top of the 10% Beat the GMAT discount for all GMAT prep and MBA admissions consulting services. So all you have to do is just mention this webinar as it says on the screen. You can take down that phone number or email Stratus Prep for more information. Just for your convenience, the Beat the GMAT team will also send a follow-up email to people who RSVP to the session with this information. So don't feel like you need to scramble for a pen if you don't have one right now. Again, a huge thank you to both Shawn as well as our friends at Stratus Prep for putting on this great presentation. And also a big thank you to our audience members for attending this evening. We all wish you the best of luck in this MBA admissions process, so get to work. All the best.